Ever looked at your neighbor and wondered about their secrets? Dive deep into a story where those secrets are darker than the blackest night. The summer of 1991 in Milwaukee seemed to stretch its arms wider than usual, embracing the city with a simmering warmth. But beneath that inviting touch was an unease that prickled at the skin, especially within the tight-knit corners of the city's gay community. The wind that swept through the streets carried whispers of names of young men who hadn't returned calls, missed shifts at work, vanished from their favorite haunts. In the dimly lit bars that dotted the heart of the city, patrons spoke in hushed tones, casting furtive glances towards the door every time it swung open. Conversations that once revolved around love, dreams, or the latest gossip now centered on a chilling topic: the series of inexplicable disappearances. The unsettling stories seemed to multiply by the day tales of friends who'd simply vanished after a night out, or acquaintances last seen leaving with a stranger. One night, at a particularly popular bar known as the Phoenix, a group sat in a shadowed booth, their conversation echoing the concerns of the community. "It's like they've been plucked from the earth," murmured Paul, a tall man with ebony hair. "Gone without a trace. No one sees anything, no one knows anything." Jenna, a fiery redhead with piercing blue eyes, sipped her drink, her expression grave. "It's making me think twice about stepping out," she said. "These are our friends, our family. We need to look out for each other now more than ever." Tales of horror often have a way of transmuting into urban legends. Whispered rumors of someone or something preying on the young men began to circulate. Some said it was a gang, others whispered of a lone predator, and a few even spoke of darker, more supernatural theories. The fear was palpable, like an electric current charging the very air. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows over the city, a leaflet campaign sprang up. Flyers with bold, cautionary words were distributed, reminding everyone to stay safe. "Don't leave with strangers," they read. "Keep close, stay vigilant." Yet, as days turned into weeks, the undercurrent of fear began to weave itself into the very fabric of the community. The cheerful banter that once defined the atmosphere of the Phoenix and places like it was now subdued, replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of glasses and the occasional murmur of conversation. As the summer pressed on, the golden hue of daytime gave way to the deep blues of night far too quickly, and the streets of Milwaukee held their breath, waiting, watching, and hoping for answers that seemed just out of reach. On the edge of one of those long summer nights, as twilight spread its deep velvet hues across Milwaukee, a man walked into the Phoenix. The dim glow of neon signs played off the contours of his face, accentuating his ordinary features. His eyes, however, were another story. They held a depth, a kind of magnetism that was impossible to ignore. He took a seat at the bar, the weight of many eyes on him, their curiosity piqued. He ordered a drink, his voice smooth, lulling almost. No one recognized him, but he had that air, the kind that makes you feel like you've known someone for ages, even if you've just met. Over the course of the evening, he introduced himself to a few of the regulars. "Jeff," he'd say with a half smile, "just passing through town." He had a knack for conversation, for finding those threads of commonality, weaving them into something that felt intimate, familiar. To the onlookers, he was just another patron, looking for connection in a place designed for just that. As the night deepened, his true intentions began to unfurl. He started to mention a peculiar offer, nonchalantly, almost as an afterthought. "I'm an amateur photographer," he'd say, pulling out a wad of cash. "Looking for models. Pays well for just a few shots." The lure of easy money, especially in the tight economy of the time, was hard to resist for many. Young men, their inhibitions lowered by alcohol and the promise of a quick buck, found themselves drawn to him. His charm, the ordinary facade he wore so well, masked the undercurrent of something more sinister. It wasn't desperation in his eyes, but hunger. And in a city already on edge, His was a dance of deception played out in the most dangerous way. One particular individual, a man named Steve, was especially taken in. With sandy brown hair and an infectious laugh, he was the life of any gathering. That night, as he sat talking with Jeff, the weight of his student loans pressing on him, the offer seemed almost too good to be true. Others watched, some with envy, others with a gnawing sense of unease, as Steve and Jeff shared a drink, their laughter echoing in the now dwindling crowd. But no one could really place why they felt that way. After all, what harm could come from a few photos? As the clock neared closing time, Steve was seen leaving with Jeff, the promise of quick money guiding his steps. The door to the Phoenix closed behind them, swallowing their figures into the inky blackness of the Milwaukee night. The apartment building was unremarkable, another structure lining the streets of Milwaukee, housing countless stories behind its faded brick walls. But apartment 213 held secrets that would defy understanding, concealed within its mundane confines. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with a metallic tang and an undercurrent of decay, the kind that sticks to the back of your throat, refusing to let go. It was an incongruity. The outside seemed so ordinary, yet the inside bore the weight of something dark, twisted. The living room was stark, almost clinical, but it was the scattered Polaroids that caught the eye first. Faces, many young, stared back with a haunting vacancy. Some were just portraits, while others, far more grotesque, showcased unimaginable torment. They were not just pictures, but trophies, each telling a silent, horrific tale. Beside them lay an assortment of tools, each more sinister than the last: drills, saws, and various chemicals in unmarked bottles. Their mere presence was a grim testament to their utility. They weren't tools for fixing or building, but rather for dismantling, for destruction. Yet in this very room, amidst these very horrors, sat Dahmer. His outward calmness belied the tempest raging inside him. He often found himself caught in a macabre duality, one part of him recoiling in disgust at his own actions, the other part urging him on, seduced by the monstrous desires that had taken root deep within. He would often sit for hours, staring at the Polaroids, battling the maelstrom of emotions they evoked: regret, lust, power, shame. At times, he'd pick up a photograph, tracing the contours of a face, murmuring apologies to the silent specters that haunted him. But even as he did, the dark urges whispered, ever insistent, promising ecstasy in surrender, urging him to continue his descent into the abyss. There was a mirror in the room, and occasionally he'd catch his reflection. In those moments, even he was taken aback by the hollowness in his eyes, the emptiness that seemed to echo the void within. It was a chilling reminder that the ordinary exterior he projected to the world was but a mask, hiding the insatiable beast within. But for all his internal struggles, for all the nights spent wrestling with his own demons, the pull of his dark desires proved too strong. The cycle of hunt, capture, and unspeakable act would begin anew, the apartment's walls bearing silent witness to the horrors within. Tracy Edwards, a tall figure with a strong build and a history etched on his face, met Dahmer under the pretense of an easy job and quick cash. The streets had been unkind to Tracy over the years, so when opportunity knocked, he was more than willing to answer. The promise of money was tempting, especially to a man who had known many nights of cold and hunger. When he arrived at the building, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Like the other structures on the block, it was nondescript, blending seamlessly into the urban tapestry of Milwaukee. Apartment 213, however, was another story. The moment Tracy stepped over the threshold, a putrid stench invaded his nostrils. It was an amalgam of rot, chemicals, and something indefinably foul. Tracy tried to dismiss it, attributing the odor to garbage or old food, but a primitive part of his brain screamed that something was amiss. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the sterile surroundings. Then, they landed on the photographs. Faces, distorted in anguish, their silent screams captured in the stillness of Polaroids. Tracy's heart raced, each beat echoing a growing dread. These weren't just pictures. They were confessions, chilling testaments to the depravity of the man standing beside him. Yet before he could fully process the horror before him, Tracy's attention was drawn to what could only be described as decorations. It wasn't just the photographs. There were drawings, crude sketches of twisted forms, and fragments of what looked like bones. The room seemed to close in on him, every shadow holding a secret, every corner whispering tales of torment. The weight of countless lost souls pressed on Tracy, their silent cries resonating with his own growing terror. Dahmer, watching him closely, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes, as if amused by the dawning realization on Tracy's face. The facade of the ordinary man from the bar was gone, replaced by a predator reveling in the fear of his prey. As the gravity of his situation began to sink in, Tracy's mind raced. The promise of money now felt like a distant dream, replaced by a more primal goal: survival. The room's stifling air grew heavier as Dahmer moved with deliberate purpose, producing a pair of handcuffs from a nearby drawer. With a swift motion, he lunged at Tracy, attempting to secure both of his wrists. But Tracy, fueled by adrenaline, managed to yank one hand away just in time, leaving only one wrist trapped in cold steel. Dahmer's eyes, previously filled with dark amusement, now displayed frustration and a glimmer of desperation. Their dance had begun. "Relax," Dahmer murmured, his voice a chilling contrast to the chaos Tracy felt inside. "It's all part of the fun." Trying to quell the panic threatening to consume him, Tracy took a deep, shaky breath. He knew he needed to think, to strategize. An overt act of defiance might seal his fate, but compliance could buy him time. "Look, man," Tracy began, struggling to keep his voice even. "I don't know what you're into, but if it's money you want, I can get it for you." As if to further the illusion of normality, Dahmer reached for the remote and pressed play on an old VHS player. A movie began, its soundtrack eerily cheerful against the backdrop of their standoff. The flickering screen cast grotesque shadows, painting both men in a ghoulish light. While feigning interest in the film, Tracy's eyes never left Dahmer. He noticed the glint of a blade, strategically placed on a nearby table. A knife, its purpose chillingly clear. The very instrument Dahmer had intended for him. With every passing second, Tracy's mind raced, devising countless escape routes. But the handcuff was a stark reminder of his compromised position. He had to be smart. He had to wait for the perfect moment. As the movie droned on, the two men continued their silent standoff, each waiting for the other to make a move. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick cloud of dread and anticipation. Tracy, desperate and cornered, knew that this was a game of life or death, and every decision could be his last. The oppressive weight of the situation settled heavier on Tracy with each passing second. With the gleam of the knife and Dahmer's predator-like focus, time seemed to stretch and warp. Then, in a fleeting moment when Dahmer's attention wavered, perhaps drawn to a particular scene in the movie or a noise from the corridor, Tracy saw his chance. Mustering every ounce of energy and desperation, Tracy threw a punch. It landed squarely on Dahmer's jaw, the impact reverberating through his knuckles. The element of surprise worked in Tracy's favor, sending Dahmer stumbling backward. Without a second's hesitation, Tracy bolted from the apartment. The hallway became a blur as he sprinted, the metallic rattle of the handcuff echoing his rapid heartbeat. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every closed door a potential trap. But he didn't dare look back. Bursting out into the night, the chilling wind stung Tracy's face, contrasting sharply with the sweat that drenched him. The streets of Milwaukee, usually familiar and mundane, now felt like a haunting labyrinth. Desperation edged his vision as he searched for anyone, anything that might offer salvation. Then, in the distance, the soft glow of headlights illuminated two figures in uniform. Police. Drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, Tracy made a final sprint towards them, waving frantically. "Help!" he shouted, his voice raspy and filled with urgency. The officers, initially startled by the sight of a handcuffed man charging towards them, paused. Their trained eyes quickly assessed Tracy, taking in the desperation and raw fear. One of them reached for his radio, while the other stepped forward cautiously. "Easy there," the nearer officer said, hands raised in a calming gesture. "We're here to help." The cold steel of the handcuff, previously a symbol of Tracy's dire circumstances, now became a beacon, signaling his cry for help, drawing the officers into the chilling narrative that began in apartment 213. The officers exchanged dubious glances, their professional skepticism evident. An agitated, handcuffed man, tales of a sinister apartment, and mention of a local nobody named Jeffrey Dahmer. But they had taken an oath, and the wild desperation in Tracy's eyes nudged at their duty. The apartment complex stood innocuous in the muted glow of streetlights, hiding its sinister secrets behind closed doors. As they climbed the stairs, the weight of Tracy's allegations seemed to permeate the very walls, each step creaking in reluctant agreement. With a sense of foreboding, they stood outside apartment 213, a door like any other but one that would imprint on their memories forever. Before knocking, they paused, catching an unsettling aroma seeping from under the door. An odor of decay, almost metallic in its intensity. Upon knocking, there was no response. Using their authority, they entered. The dim light inside the apartment cast elongated shadows, amplifying the grotesque ambiance. The floor was littered with old magazines, discarded clothes, and Polaroids. Upon closer inspection, their contents sent waves of revulsion coursing through the officers. The images showcased unspeakable acts, faces frozen in terror, contorted by pain, and subsequently dismemberment. Each Polaroid captured a moment of horror, a snapshot of Dahmer's descent into darkness. As the officers ventured deeper, the stench grew stronger, guiding them towards its source, the fridge, a bastion of normalcy in most homes, but in apartment 213, it concealed the unimaginable. The officers exchanged another glance, this one of shared dread. Their skepticism had evaporated, replaced by the chilling realization that Tracy's claims might just be the tip of the iceberg. The night air, once a haven after the intensity of Dahmer's lair, now seemed to press in on them, heavy with the weight of dark knowledge. As they radioed in for backup, the grim gravity of their discovery settled, drawing them further into the abyss of human depravity. Jeffrey Dahmer, sitting in the dingy confines of his apartment, seemed for all the world like a wounded animal caught in a trap. Panic and confusion danced in his eyes, playing a manic duet with a defiance that hinted at his darkened soul. Outside, sirens howled, their screams tearing through the night, converging on this epicenter of malevolence. Red and blue lights flickered, casting eerie silhouettes on the walls of apartment 213. The officers, armed with their grim knowledge and bolstered by backup, approached Dahmer. When he met their gaze, it wasn't the eyes of a monster they saw, but a man. A man frayed by the fringes of his own mind, bearing the weight of unspeakable horrors. He didn't resist. In a sense, it seemed as if he had been waiting for this very moment, his countenance a mix of relief and resignation. As they led him away, a search team began to methodically dissect the chambers of Dahmer's hell. The discoveries mounted rapidly, tools specifically tailored for dissection, acid vats that held remains, and a haunting scorecard that chronicled 17 murders. Each new revelation painted a grotesque masterpiece of a mind unhinged. Outside, as news crews swarmed and neighbors gawked, the two initial officers stood aside, watching the scene unfurl. The weight of what they had uncovered, the sheer scale of Dahmer's atrocities, pressed down on them. It was as if the universe had shifted, their understanding of human capacity forever altered. In the glaring lights and chaotic cadence of police radios, the silent screams of Dahmer's victims echoed, their voices demanding justice from beyond the grave. The night, though filled with activity, felt hauntingly still, as if the very air held its breath, awaiting retribution. The dawn of a new day would reveal the depth of Dahmer's darkness. But for now, amidst the wailing sirens and the buzzing crowd, there was an unsettling calm. The storm had yet to fully unleash. The city of Milwaukee awoke to a morning sun that shed light on the darkest corners of humanity. News vans lined the streets, reporters scrambling to piece together a narrative that felt more fiction than reality. The tale of Jeffrey Dahmer, once an enigma, now tore through the fabric of America. Radios buzzed with grim details, television screens flashed with haunting images, and newspapers splashed chilling headlines. Every revelation was met with shock, disgust, and a universal question. How? How did this unassuming man manifest such wickedness? Dahmer's confession was a descent into the abyss. Each word, dripping with cold clarity, laid bare the twisted psyche of a predator. The confessions were not just a catalog of crimes, they were a roadmap into a mind seduced by its own deviance. Families clung closer, conversations grew hushed, and doors locked tighter as people processed the magnitude of the terror that had lurked among them. The very fabric of trust was torn asunder. If Dahmer could wear the face of an ordinary man while harboring such monstrous desires, then what masks might others wear? In the dim light of his cell, as the world tried to comprehend the incomprehensible, Dahmer sat. The room was cold, its walls unforgiving, but in this solitude he seemed almost free. Free from the chains of his own making, the compulsion that drove him to darkness. As Milwaukee grappled with its newfound notoriety, somber reflections echoed throughout the nation. Discussions sprouted in coffee shops, at dinner tables, on television debates. Reflections on the human condition, the potential for evil that might reside in all, and the deceptive facades that could shroud such malevolence. For many, Dahmer's story was a chilling reminder that monsters do not always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they stand in the daylight, blending seamlessly into the crowd. And as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, a heavy truth settled. Evil does not always look like we expect. It can be ordinary, it can be familiar, and sometimes it can be standing right next to us. As our story comes to a close, let the lull of this soothing ambiance continue to cradle you further into your journey of calmness and rest. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your relaxation and sleep routine tonight. Remember, each day brings a new story, and each night brings a fresh chance to regenerate, to dream, and to become more of who you are. Good night, dear listener. Until our next story, sleep well and dream beautifully.